I gave him everything, my love, my savings, my trust. All he wanted was my money, not my presence.
My true story from Nevada. Mom, I need your money, but I don't want you at my wedding. You'll ruin the aesthetic. That's what my son David said to me
I
as
gave
he
him
casually
everything,
sipped
my
his cold
love, my
brew at my kitchen
savings, my
table.
trust.
Not a whisper,
All he
not
wanted
a
was my
soft
money,
letdown,
not my
just a
presence.
cold, rehearsed statement delivered with a kind of emotional flatline only a stranger might use. But this was my son, my only child. And next to him, her legs crossed and her expression smug, sat his fiancée Brittany. Platinum blonde, too much lip gloss, and not a single ounce of warmth in her gaze. She reached for David's hand across the table and gave me a
I
condescending
gave him
smile like
everything,
I
my
was the
love,
hired
my
help who'd
savings, my
overstayed my
trust.
shift. It's
All he
nothing
wanted was my
personal,
money,
she
not
added
my
quickly,
presence.
like salt on an open wound. But we're curating a specific look for the wedding, Lorraine. It's going to be a luxe boho theme. Think whites and creams, pampas grass, minimalism. No offense, but your style is very 90s. I blinked. Style? I wore my nicest blouse for this meeting, peach lace, delicate buttons, my wedding pearls.
I gave him
My hair was
everything, my
curled,
love,
my
my
makeup light.
savings, my
I had
trust.
baked banana bread that
All he
morning,
wanted was
but
my
it didn't
money, not
matter.
my
I could
presence.
have walked in wearing Chanel, and it wouldn't have made a difference. I wasn't a person to them anymore. I was a pocket. I already transferred the money, I said, my voice thin. David nodded.
Right.
Thank you for that. We wouldn't have been able to book the rooftop without it. It's going to be perfect. Brittany's cousin's a photographer. He's doing this Vogue-style shoot at sunset.
I
Drone
gave him
footage,
everything, my
everything.
love, my
I sat very
savings, my
still.
trust.
I looked at my
All he
son,
wanted
at the
was my
soft beard
money,
on his
not my
jaw, the
presence.
same cleft in his chin he'd had since he was a baby. I remembered washing his tiny feet in the sink after soccer practice. I remembered holding his hand at the dentist when he was afraid of the needle. I remember taking 3 buses to make it to every parent-teacher conference, no matter how exhausted I was after work. I remembered every second of loving him. And yet, in that moment, David had no memory
I
of
gave
me.
him
I
everything,
thought
my
I'd be
love,
there,
my
I
savings, my
said,
trust.
barely a whisper.
All he
Brittany's
wanted was my
eyes
money,
narrowed
not my
slightly.
presence.
It's not about love, Lorraine. It's about energy. The energy of the room. You're more of a traditional presence. We're keeping the guest list under 100. Super tight. Mostly friends our age. We don't want things to feel awkward. And I'd be awkward? Not you, David lied. It's just weddings are stressful. We don't want drama. Brittany's
I gave
parents
him
are covering the
everything, my
honeymoon,
love,
so it
my
kind of balances
savings, my
out.
trust.
The breath left my
All he
lungs.
wanted was my
I had
money,
given
not
them
my presence.
$38,000. That money was not a gift. It was my savings. It was my retirement. It was the nest egg my late husband and I had built with overtime hours, penny pinching, and years of self-denial. We didn't vacation. We didn't eat out. I wore thrifted shoes to work for 12 years. And just like that, it was gone. But I didn't scream. I didn't
I
cry.
gave him
I
everything, my
smiled
love, my
politely and
savings,
nodded.
my
Of
trust.
course, I
All
said,
he wanted was my
because I
money,
knew
not
what they
my
didn't.
presence.
I knew that their wedding might be curated, but so was I. I was curating something else. Something older. Something deeper. Justice. Later that night, I sat in my recliner with an old photo album in my lap. The banana bread sat untouched on the kitchen counter, cooling under a towel. I flipped through the pages slowly. David on his first day of school.
I gave
David
him
in his Little
everything, my
League
love,
uniform.
my
David
savings,
holding
my
a worm
trust.
and screaming because
All
he
he
was too
wanted was
scared to
my
fish.
money, not my
David with
presence.
missing teeth. David in his graduation gown. And me. Always behind him. Always lifting. Always loving. There were no photos of Brittany. None of her wiping his tears. None of her staying up all night when he had the flu. None of her clapping in the school auditorium when he played the third shepherd in a Christmas pageant. She hadn't earned him. I had.
I gave him
But that
everything,
night,
my love,
as I looked
my
around my
savings,
empty
my
house,
trust.
I saw
All
clearly.
he wanted
I
was
had
my
raised him
money,
to
not
become
my
exactly this
presence.
kind of man. A man who thought love was transactional. A man who thought family was optional. A man who could take and take without shame, without looking back. And that meant his failure would be mine. Unless I rewrote the ending. The next morning I called the bank. Then I called the county clerk's office. Then I made one last phone call. to someone I hadn't spoken to in
I
over
gave him
5 years.
everything, my
His
love,
name was
my
Pete.
savings,
He
my
was my
trust.
brother-in-law, my
All he
husband's
wanted was my
estranged
money,
brother.
not my
They'd fallen
presence.
out after a nasty inheritance dispute, but Pete and I had remained civil over the years. He lived in Henderson and ran a small security tech business. He owed me a favor, and I intended to cash it in. The next day, he showed up on my porch with a box of donuts and a laptop. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where my son had told me I was too embarrassing to attend his
I
wedding,
gave him
and I
everything,
told
my
Pete
love, my
everything. He
savings,
didn't
my
ask questions.
trust.
He just
All he
listened.
wanted was
Then
my
he
money, not
smiled.
my
"What do you want to
presence.
do?" he asked. I looked down at my wrinkled hands. "I want to teach them both a lesson they'll never forget," I said. "I want them to understand what it means to disrespect someone who built their entire life on love." Pete nodded. "Then let's make this wedding unforgettable." And that's when it started. The quiet revenge of a mother they thought was disposable. Pete was
I
fast.
gave him
By the
everything,
time
my
we'd finished
love,
the
my
donuts,
savings,
he'd
my
already
trust.
mapped out a strategy
All
on
he
his
wanted
laptop.
was my money,
He pulled
not
up
my
screenshots of the
presence.
venue's rooftop layout, the guest list Brittany had probably posted on Instagram, and, most importantly, the contracts. "How did you get all this?" I asked, stunned. He just winked. "I told you I do security systems. People leave a trail of digital breadcrumbs so big you could follow it blindfolded." Brittany's entire planning process is online Google Docs, Dropbox
I
folders,
gave him
Pinterest
everything, my
boards.
love,
She
my
even
savings,
uploaded a
my
sample guest
trust.
experience
All
map
he
with
wanted was
check-in
my
flows
money,
and
not my
audio
presence.
cues. Audio cues? I blinked.
Yeah.
They're having a voiceover announce each stage of the wedding like it's a Hollywood premiere. "Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the first dance," that sort of thing. My jaw dropped. Pete chuckled. "This generation thinks a wedding is a brand launch. It's not love, it's theater." The idea formed in my
I gave
head
him
like a flickering
everything, my
flame.
love, my
"What if,"
savings, my
I said
trust.
slowly,
All he
"we
wanted
rewrite the
was my
script?"
money, not my
Pete leaned
presence.
back. "Go on. I can't stop the wedding. But maybe I can leave them with a performance they'll never forget." He grinned. "You want to crash it?" "No," I corrected. "I want to haunt it." First, I went silent. No calls. No texts. No messages. I watched from a distance while Brittany and David posted their countdowns on social media.
I
T-minus
gave
12
him
days until I
everything, my
become
love,
Mrs.
my
Harrison,
savings,
she
my
wrote with a
trust.
glittery gif of her
All he
engagement
wanted
ring.
was my money,
"Big
not
thanks
my
to our
presence.
generous family donors. Couldn't have done it without you." Family donors.
I was a donor now.
Meanwhile, I made quiet moves. I visited the courthouse to double-check my own records. David didn't know I had power of attorney over an old family trust his father had set up. That trust contained a few bonds we'd saved for David's future, untouched since his teenage years.
I
I
gave him
transferred
everything,
them.
my
Then
love,
I
my
went to the bank
savings, my
and requested
trust.
printed records
All
of
he
every
wanted was
cent
my
I had
money,
wired.
not my
Then I
presence.
called a lawyer. "You're not trying to sue your son, are you?" she asked delicately, looking over the documents. "No," I said with a smile. "I'm just updating my estate planning. And I want to make sure every decision is documented and notarized." Because if there was one thing Brittany loved, it was the idea of legacy. And I planned to leave one. Just not the kind she
I
expected.
gave him
3
everything,
days
my
before the
love,
wedding,
my
I mailed a
savings, my
card to
trust.
Brittany's parents.
All he
A
wanted
simple
was my
envelope,
money, not my
ivory,
presence.
expensive. Inside was a handwritten note. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Klein, thank you for raising such a strong-willed, confident daughter. I can see where Brittany gets her values. Please consider this small token a gesture of goodwill and congratulations. Sincerely, Lorraine Harrison." Tucked inside was a photocopy of the bank transfer I'd made,
I gave him everything,
$38,000,
my love,
with a
my
sticky note on it.
savings, my trust.
Aesthetic over
All he
ancestry, I
wanted was my
understand.
money, not
But
my
just so we're all
presence.
clear, this was the price. I never heard back. But I didn't need to. Pete worked through the nights leading up to the wedding. He installed something into the audio cue laptop that Brittany's cousin was using to run the announcements. A small override script. "No one will notice," Pete assured me. "It'll kick in during the final dance. You'll get exactly 90 seconds.
I
Enough
gave
time
him
to say
everything, my
everything that
love,
needs
my
to be said."
savings, my
"I
trust.
don't want to say
All he
anything,"
wanted
I
was my
told him.
money, not
He
my
raised an
presence.
eyebrow. I smiled. "I want to show them." So we wrote a message together. Not a rant. Not a list of complaints. A story. One they couldn't stop. The night before the wedding, I took out a dress I hadn't worn in years. Not flashy, just elegant, a deep navy blue with silver buttons and a fitted waist. The last time I wore it was at David's high
I gave
school
him
graduation.
everything, my
I
love,
remembered
my
how proud I
savings, my
felt that day.
trust.
How I
All
thought
he
he's going to be
wanted was
someone
my
good.
money, not my
He'll make me
presents.
proud again and again. How naive. I packed the dress carefully into a garment bag and zipped it shut. Then I picked up a small wooden box from my bedroom shelf. Inside it was an old USB drive and a folded note. I placed both inside a sealed envelope. On the front, I wrote, "For David, open only after the wedding." It wasn't a threat. It
I
was the
gave him
truth.
everything, my
And it would
love, my
wait, like
savings, my
me,
trust.
for the right moment to
All
be
he
seen.
wanted was my
The morning
money,
of the
not my
wedding, I
presents.
drank coffee alone on my porch. The sun was bright. The air smelled like honeysuckle and heat. My phone buzzed with notifications, Brittany's Instagram stories, posts from bridesmaids clinking mimosas, someone filming a behind-the-scenes video of the dress reveal. Not a single message for me. Not one. At noon, Pete texted, "All systems
I
go."
gave him everything,
I
my
replied with a
love,
heart.
my savings,
Then I
my
waited.
trust.
The wedding started
All
at
he
6.
wanted was my
By
money,
7,
not my
the
presents.
ceremony was over. By 8, they were taking their first dance under a canopy of white roses and twinkle lights. And at 8:17 p.m., Pete's script triggered the final surprise. A hush fell over the rooftop as the lights dimmed for the finale moment. The DJ made the announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, please draw your attention to the screen behind the couple
I
for a
gave him
special
everything,
tribute."
my love,
The
my
projector
savings,
screen lit
my
up.
trust.
At first, it
All
was a
he
black
wanted
and
was
white
my
photo
money,
of
not
baby
my
David in a
presents.
hospital blanket. Then another, David learning to walk. David with missing teeth. David holding up a macaroni Mother's Day card with the words, "I love you MOM," scribbled in crayon. Guests began to murmur. The slideshow played on. David at age 5 in a cowboy hat and boots sitting on my lap. David crying after scraping his knee, and me cleaning the
I gave
wound
him
with a cotton
everything,
ball.
my love,
David
my
holding a
savings,
trophy
my
at his 8th
trust.
grade spelling bee,
All he
me
wanted
in the
was
front
my
row,
money, not my
clapping.
presents.
Then the music changed. A soft piano track played underneath the images. My voice came in, not live, not loud, just recorded.
Calm. Steady.
To the boy I loved more than anything, "You were my world, my purpose, my light." Every scraped knee I kissed. Every night I stayed up with you through the flu. Every
I gave
dollar
him
I saved
everything,
instead
my
of spent.
love, my
Every
savings, my
sacrifice I
trust.
made so you
All
could
he
stand
wanted was
taller.
my money,
I never
not my
needed a
presents.
thank you, just a place beside you. But when you chose a guest list over your mother, you reminded me, love, unreturned, becomes history. So here's yours. The screen faded to black. Then a final slide. $38,000, the cost of silence. Paid in full. Mother of the groom. Uninvited,
I gave
but
him everything,
unforgettable.
my love,
Gasps
my
echoed
savings, my
across the
trust.
rooftop. The
All he
projector shut
wanted
off.
was my money,
The
not
music
my
stopped.
presents.
And Brittany's perfectly curated wedding became the most whispered about event in Nevada by morning. The silence after the final slide was the loudest thing I never heard. I wasn't there on the rooftop, of course. I didn't need to be. Pete sent me the video clip captured by one of the servers on his security feed. 20 seconds of Brittany's frozen smile collapsing into confusion, then rage.
I gave him everything,
David
my
looked stunned,
love,
his
my
mouth open,
savings, my
hands
trust.
twitching like he didn't know
All
whether
he
to
wanted
laugh
was
or
my
cry.
money, not my
Guests
presents.
looked around, shifting uncomfortably. Some put down their drinks. A few clapped awkwardly, unsure if it was part of the show. It wasn't. It was real. My story had been told without me ever stepping foot in their perfect little aesthetic. I closed the laptop and sat back in my recliner, staring at the shadows on my living room wall. I wasn't angry anymore.
I gave him
I wasn't even
everything, my
sad.
love, my
I just
savings,
felt
my
clean,
trust.
emptied out in the
All
best
he
way.
wanted was
They
my
thought
money,
I was
not my
gone,
presents.
but I had left a ghost in the room. And that ghost was finally heard. 2 days passed. Not a word from David. No text. No voicemail. No half-hearted explanation for why his wedding exploded into a PR crisis in the middle of downtown Las Vegas. I wasn't surprised. I'd raised him to be polite. I hadn't raised him to be accountable. And that was the problem.
I gave him
The following
everything, my
morning,
love,
I
my
went to the post
savings, my
office and
trust.
dropped off the envelope
All
I'd
he wanted
prepared,
was my
the one
money,
with the
not my
USB and the
presents.
note inside. It was addressed to David's condo in Henderson, the one he shared with Brittany. That afternoon, I made lunch, grilled cheese and tomato soup, and watched an old murder mystery while the rain tapped gently at the windows. Around 3:12 p.m., the phone rang. It was David. I let it ring 6 times before I picked up. "Hello, Mom."
I gave him
His voice
everything, my
cracked like a
love,
boy
my
again.
savings, my
"What the hell did
trust.
you do?" I
All he
stayed
wanted was
calm.
my money,
"Did you
not my
receive the
presents.
package?" He hesitated. "Yes." "Did you watch it?" A long pause. "Yeah," he said, finally quieter. I watched it. Inside the envelope, along with the slideshow file, was a video I'd recorded just for him. Not for the guests. Not for Brittany. Just for my son. I had sat in my backyard on a Sunday afternoon, wearing my peach blouse and
I
my
gave him
pearls.
everything,
The
my
wind
love,
was
my
soft.
savings,
My
my
voice was
trust.
even softer.
All he wanted was
"David,"
my
I
money,
had
not
said,
my
"you are the
presents.
best thing I ever made. But you are no longer the best thing about me. You took what wasn't yours, and you shamed the woman who gave you everything. I'm not angry. I'm awake. And from now on, I'm living like I matter too." Now, on the phone, he had no words. I let him sit in that silence. "I didn't think you'd actually," he mumbled, "stand up for myself?" I
I
said
gave him
gently,
everything, my
"That was the
love, my
mistake, wasn't it?"
savings, my
He
trust.
exhaled shakily.
All he wanted was
"Brittany's
my money,
furious.
not my
Her parents
presents.
are threatening to sue. They said you embarrassed them." They were embarrassed by the truth. "Do you know what this has done to us?" he asked, voice rising. "I do," I said. "Everything's ruined now." "No, David," I replied. "Not everything. Just the illusion." Then I hung up. I didn't hear from him again for another week. But the fallout rolled in quickly,
I
like a
gave him
tide I
everything,
didn't
my
have to
love,
touch to
my
know it was
savings,
working.
my
The wedding
trust.
hashtag,
All he wanted was
Brittany
my
and David
money,
Vow
not my
Vibes, had been
presents.
hijacked online. Guests had started posting reaction videos.
TikToks, tweets.
Some praised the boldness. Others were scandalized. One post read, "When the groom's mother drops a $38,000 truth bomb during the final dance. Icon." Another, "This is what happens when you forget who raised you." Clapping hands. Brittany turned her
I gave him
Instagram to
everything,
private
my
within
love, my
48 hours.
savings, my
David's
trust.
LinkedIn quietly
All he
deleted the
wanted
wedding
was my
photos he'd
money, not my
posted just days
presents.
before. And I went grocery shopping like nothing happened. A woman in the store recognized me from the viral video. She stopped me by the bananas and whispered, "Was that really you?" I just smiled. "I hope you sleep well at night," she said. "I do," I told her. Finally. But justice doesn't end with one act. It's not a single moment.
I
It's a
gave
way
him
of living.
everything, my
So
love,
I
my
kept going.
savings, my
I canceled the
trust.
joint bank account
All he
David had
wanted was
access
my
to.
money, not
Years
my
ago,
presents.
I'd added him in case of emergencies. That account was now closed. I moved what little was left into a credit union under my name only. I also visited a financial advisor for the first time in years. Told him I wanted to live smart, not small. That I was done giving things away. And then, on a quiet Thursday afternoon, I opened a letter I'd written to myself.
I
I
gave
had
him
written it 3
everything, my
years ago,
love, my
back when
savings, my
David asked for
trust.
money to start a small
All he
business
wanted was
and
my
then ghosted
money,
me
not
for
my
2 months
presents.
after the deal fell through. The letter was simple. "Dear Lorraine, please remember, silence is not love. Giving is not the same as being valued. And you're allowed to say no. You are allowed to have peace." I cried reading that. Not because I was sad, but because, for the first time, I felt like someone was protecting me. And that someone was me. A
I
month
gave him
passed.
everything, my
Then
love,
2.
my
Still
savings,
no
my
apology.
trust.
But I didn't need
All he
one.
wanted was
I
my
was
money,
growing
not my
again.
presents.
In my own way. I joined a book club. I started walking every morning. I planted lavender in the front yard and painted the porch swing blue. I even had coffee with Pete every Tuesday just to laugh. And one day I got a letter in the mail. No stamp, just left in my mailbox. It was handwritten, in my son's unmistakable scrawl.
Mom.
I
gave
don't know
him
how to say I'm
everything, my
sorry,
love, my
so I won't try
savings,
to
my
pretend this
trust.
letter fixes
All he
anything.
wanted was
But
my
I wanted
money,
you to
not
know,
my presents.
I see it now. All of it. You didn't ruin my wedding. You saved me from starting a life with a woman who only loved what I could take from others. I miss you. I'm trying to unlearn what I let happen. Please, can we talk sometime? I stared at the letter for a long while. Then I folded it neatly and slid it into my photo album, right behind the picture of David in his graduation gown. I didn't call him
I
back
gave
that
him
day,
everything,
but
my
I
love,
would,
my savings,
eventually,
my trust.
because justice
All he
isn't
wanted was
cruelty.
my money,
It's
not my
clarity, and
presence.
sometimes the clearest message takes time to echo back. 3 more weeks passed before I heard his voice again. I was out front trimming my lavender when I saw his car pull up. David. He stepped out slowly, no Brittany beside him, no designer sunglasses, no smug tilt in his jaw. Just my son, the way I remembered him when he was 13 and ashamed of a bad
I
grade,
gave him
or when he
everything, my love,
accidentally
my
broke the kitchen
savings, my
window and
trust.
didn't know how to tell
All
me.
he wanted
This
was my
time,
money,
he
not
walked
my
up to the porch
presence.
and stood at the bottom of the steps. I didn't know if you'd be home, he said quietly. I looked up from my shears. I always come home. He nodded, but he didn't come up. His fingers fidgeted at his sides, eyes downcast. I wanted to say it, he said. Not just write it. I waited. I'm sorry, Mom. For everything. For taking your savings.
I
For,
gave
he
him
stopped,
everything, my
swallowing
love, my
hard. For
savings, my
making you feel
trust.
disposable.
All he
I
wanted
leaned on
was
the
my money,
railing
not
and
my
studied him.
presence.
His eyes were red. Not puffy, not performative, just worn down.
Real.
I don't need you to grovel, David, I said. I know, he replied. But I needed to feel it. Not just regret, but shame. Those words settled between us like dust on the old porch. And still I said nothing. He cleared his throat. Brittany and I. You don't
I
need to
gave
tell
him
me,
everything,
I
my love,
interrupted.
my savings,
No, I
my
do.
trust.
He
All he
exhaled.
wanted was my
It's
money,
over.
not my
She said.
presence.
I humiliated her. Her parents wanted her to sue. She gave back her ring. Did you give mine back? I asked. He looked confused. The ring I gave you when you turned 18. Your father's wedding band. His face changed. I still have it, he said quickly. I'd never give that up. I nodded. Then that's a start. We sat on the porch in silence after
I gave
that.
him
He
everything, my
asked if I
love,
had
my
more of the banana
savings,
bread
my
from that day.
trust.
I did.
All he
I
wanted
warmed
was
it
my
up and
money,
made
not my
coffee.
presence.
We didn't talk about the wedding, or the money, or the years I'd been taken for granted. We just sat. And for the first time in months, I saw flickers of the boy I used to know, the boy who built Lego castles on my kitchen floor and wrote me birthday cards in crayon. That boy had vanished somewhere in the noise of ambition and entitlement. But now he was peeking through again. Still,
I
forgiveness
gave him
isn't
everything,
instant.
my love,
It's
my
earned.
savings, my
So,
trust.
I didn't let him move
All
back
he
in.
wanted was
I
my
didn't hand
money,
him
not my
keys or
presence.
savings or second chances. I let him sit in the discomfort of rebuilding, brick by brick. And I began something new. That month, I joined a local women's circle called Silver Threads. It was mostly older women, widows, retirees, a few divorced, and starting over. We met twice a week at the community center. Sometimes we shared stories. Sometimes we
I
did
gave him
crafts.
everything, my
Sometimes we
love,
just
my
sat together
savings,
and
my
breathed.
trust.
But there was
All
something
he wanted
sacred
was
in
my
the
money,
simplicity.
not my
No
presence.
performance. No curated vibe. Just real women, with real scars and real hearts. One woman, Denise, shared a story about her daughter cutting her off after she came out. Another, called Jo, was raising her teenage grandson alone after her own child relapsed again. Each woman had carried someone else's weight for years. And each had reached her own quiet
I
breaking
gave him
point.
everything,
I
my
listened.
love, my
I
savings,
shared.
my trust.
I laughed. And
All he
slowly,
wanted was my
I
money,
began to
not my
remember who I was
presence.
before the sacrifices, before my name became just Mom. I was Lorraine. I loved knitting. I was a decent singer. I had a wicked sense of humor and a long memory. I liked old jazz records and black and white films. I missed dancing. I used to write letters to my husband in college, so beautiful, he said they made him cry. That woman hadn't gone
I gave him
anywhere.
everything,
She
my
had just
love, my
waited.
savings,
And now
my
she was
trust.
back. One
All he
afternoon
wanted
after
was my
circle,
money, not my
Jo handed me a
presence.
flyer. Look, she said, they're offering scholarships for seniors at the local college. Just one class at a time. Free tuition if you're over 65. I laughed. I haven't been in school in 50 years. Exactly, she grinned. Perfect time to go back. I folded the flyer and put it in my bag. That night, I stared at it for a long time.
I gave him
And then I
everything, my
registered.
love, my
Creative
savings,
writing,
my
Tuesday
trust.
nights.
All he
Beginner
wanted was
course.
my money,
No
not my
pressure.
presence.
Just stories. My first assignment? Write about the day you remembered your own power. I smiled when I read it, because I knew exactly what day that was. David started calling every Sunday. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we didn't. He'd ask how my classes were going. I'd ask if he was eating enough. The usual dance. But every now and then,
I
he'd
gave
ask
him
something
everything,
deeper.
my love, my
Like, were
savings,
you
my
ever
trust.
scared? Being a
All he
mom
wanted
alone
was
after
my
dad
money,
died.
not my
Or,
presence.
did you ever resent me for needing so much? And I'd answer honestly. Yes, I'd say. But I never stopped loving you. Resentment isn't the opposite of love. Neglect is. One Sunday, he told me he was seeing a therapist. I didn't cheer.
I didn't cry.
I just said, good. Another Sunday, he said he
I
wanted
gave
to
him
pay me back.
everything, my
All
love,
of it,
my
he promised.
savings, my
It'll take
trust.
time, but I
All he
want
wanted
to.
was my money,
I
not
said,
my presence.
start with $10, then keep going. I didn't need the money anymore. I needed the accountability. And he was finally giving that. On my 69th birthday, he showed up with a bouquet of lilies, my favorite. He had written a card. You taught me that silence doesn't mean weakness. You taught me that love without respect is just theft. And now you're teaching me how to be a better
I
man than
gave
I
him
was.
everything, my
Happy
love,
birthday,
my
Mom.
savings,
I
my
hugged him
trust.
for the first time in
All
nearly
he
a
wanted
year.
was my money,
It wasn't
not
a
my
dramatic
presence.
moment. No violins. No makeup-streaked tears.
Just skin against skin.
Mother and son. Still learning. Still healing.
But this isn't a fairy tale.
This is a real story. And real stories don't always end with hugs and redemption arcs. Because just when I thought things were finally quieting down, a letter arrived. Not from
I
David.
gave him everything,
Not from
my
Brittany.
love, my
From her
savings,
parents.
my trust.
Inside was a notice.
All he wanted was
They
my
were suing
money,
me
not my presence.
for emotional damage to their daughter and intentional disruption of a private event. They claimed I had violated a verbal agreement and created unlawful emotional harm through malicious interference. My hands shook as I held the paper. They were demanding $50,000 in damages. And suddenly, the woman I had spent months becoming, the woman who had learned to forgive, to rebuild,
I gave him
to dance
everything,
again,
my love,
felt pulled
my
back
savings,
into a war
my
she
trust.
thought was over.
All
But
he
I
wanted
wasn't
was my
afraid.
money, not my
Not
presence.
anymore. Because the story wasn't finished yet. I stared at the legal letter for a long time. My hands didn't tremble because I was afraid. They trembled because I was furious. The Kleins, Brittany's parents, were suing me. After everything. After they'd accepted my money, excluded me from the wedding, and let their daughter mock me to my face. And now they were calling me
I
malicious?
gave him everything,
There was
my
no
love,
phone
my
number on the letter.
savings, my
Just the
trust.
name of their attorney,
All
a
he
young
wanted
man
was
with an
my money, not my
expensive-sounding law firm,
presence.
and the kind of tone that reeked of entitlement. It didn't even matter if they had a real case. The goal was to intimidate me, to frighten the quiet little mother they thought would fold under pressure. But I had folded too many times before. This time, I sharpened. The next morning, I made 3 calls. 1 to Pete, 1 to my lawyer, and 1 to the community center.
I gave him everything,
Hi,
my love,
I told
my
the coordinator.
savings, my trust.
Do you have any open hours next week?
All he wanted
I'd like
was
to
my
offer
money,
a talk.
not my
Free
presence.
for seniors. What kind of talk? I smiled into the receiver. What to do when the family you raise turns into your enemy. I met with my lawyer that afternoon. She was young, sharp-eyed, and a former public defender. She looked over the Klein's letter with a kind of amused disbelief. They're bluffing, she said. They're hoping the threat alone will get you to pay a settlement.
I gave him
I won't.
everything, my love,
I know
my
you won't,
savings, my
but
trust.
we'll need to respond with a
All he
countersuit.
wanted was
You
my
didn't
money,
just give
not
them
my
money.
presence.
There was no written contract about its use and no condition about non-attendance. You were deliberately misled and excluded. What they're calling emotional harm was a speech about truth and boundaries. She paused. And it went viral, Lorraine. If they take this to court, they open themselves up to scrutiny. All of it. I folded my hands. I'm not doing this for revenge.
I gave him
I
everything,
said slowly.
my love, my
I'm doing it
savings,
because
my
I want to
trust.
teach people like
All
them
he
that
wanted
money
was
doesn't
my
erase
money,
humanity.
not my presence.
That you can't just treat someone like furniture and expect them to vanish quietly. My lawyer leaned back, smiling. Then let's make sure they hear you. Loud and clear. The following week, I stood at the front of the community center's multi-purpose room. 28 folding chairs were filled with women and men in their 60s, 70s, even a few 80s. All of them had
I
something
gave
in
him
common.
everything, my
They had been
love, my
forgotten,
savings, my
Used.
trust.
sidelined by
All he
children
wanted
who
was
once
my
called them
money, not my
heroes.
presence.
I'm Lorraine. I began, microphone in hand. And 2 months ago, my son took $38,000 of my savings to fund a wedding I wasn't invited to. Gasps rippled through the room. And when I stood up for myself, his in-laws tried to sue me. Someone in the back muttered, "Oh, hell no." I smiled. I didn't give them the viral story. I gave them the
I
quiet
gave him
parts,
everything,
the
my
hours
love, my
alone,
savings,
the
my
nights with
trust.
cold coffee
All
and
he
no
wanted
sleep,
was my money,
the ache
not
of
my
looking at family
presence.
photos and wondering where it all went wrong. And then I gave them hope. Because I had learned something through this pain. We are not helpless just because we're older. We are not disposable. We are not done. By the end of the talk, 3 women came up and hugged me. One handed me a crumpled envelope. Inside was a note thanking me for reminding me that being a mom doesn't mean being a doormat.
I gave him
I walked
everything,
out
my
of that
love,
center
my
taller than I'd
savings,
felt
my
in years.
trust.
That
All
night,
he wanted
David
was my
called.
money, not
He
my
had heard about the
presence.
lawsuit. I had no idea, he said quickly. They didn't tell me they were doing this. I swear. I believe you, I said. I told them to drop it, he continued. I said if they didn't, I'd go public and tell the whole truth about what happened. Every penny. Every word Brittany said to you. I was quiet. Then I asked, why are you still protecting them?
I gave
I'm
him
not,
everything, my
he
love,
said,
my
but there was
savings, my
hesitation in his
trust.
voice. She's
All
not
he
your wife
wanted was my
anymore,
money,
I
not
reminded
my
him.
presence.
They're not your in-laws. You don't owe them silence. I guess I'm just ashamed, he admitted, of who I was, of what I let happen. I understood that feeling. Shame is a long hallway. You can wander it for years, but eventually you have to find a door. Then keep walking forward, I said. You're not coming back here, but you can still move
I
somewhere
gave him
better.
everything, my
He
love,
didn't
my
say much after
savings,
that,
my trust.
but I think he understood.
All he wanted
Because
was
the
my
next
money,
morning,
not my
the
presence.
client's lawyer withdrew the lawsuit. Apparently, David had made good on his threat. I didn't thank him. Some things you do because it's right, not because you want applause. The same week the suit was dropped, I received a package. No return address. Inside was a hardcover book. Family isn't a guarantee. On the first page was a note, handwritten. You gave me
I
my
gave
first
him
story.
everything, my
Now,
love, my
maybe I can
savings,
write one
my
of my
trust.
own.
D.
All he
I
wanted was my
smiled.
money,
David
not my
had taken a
presence.
class. Creative writing. Same as me. The past was behind us. But stories? We were still writing those. At the next Silver Threads meeting, I brought lemon cake and copies of my newest short story. It was fiction, about an older woman who disguises herself as a caterer to sneak into her daughter's wedding and reveal a family secret over dessert. It was a hit.
I gave him
Joe
everything,
laughed
my
so
love,
hard
my
she choked on
savings,
her
my
coffee.
trust.
Denise
All
asked
he
for a
wanted
printed
was my
copy.
money,
The
not my
others
presence.
clapped. But afterward, one woman, a newcomer named Ruth, came up to me with tears in her eyes. Did all that really happen to you? She asked. Not exactly, I said with a small grin. But the truth was somewhere in the cake. She nodded slowly. Your story helped me, she whispered. My son hasn't spoken to me in 3 years. He says I ruined his life. But you
I
reminded me
gave
that
him
I still have
everything,
one.
my love, my
I reached
savings,
out
my
and
trust.
squeezed her hand.
All he
That's
wanted
the
was
most
my
important
money,
part,
not my
I said.
presence.
You're still here. That means you're not done. She smiled through her tears. Neither was I. The next month changed everything. Not because of something dramatic, like another lawsuit or a social media explosion, but because the silence finally felt peaceful. I had spent so many years trying to earn space in other people's lives, David's, Brittany's,
I gave
even
him
my late
everything, my
husband's when he
love,
was
my
too busy
savings,
coaching to
my
hear me.
trust.
I had made
All
myself
he wanted
smaller
was
to be
my
useful,
money, not my
quiet to
presence.
be accepted, forgiving to be loved.
But now?
I woke up every morning and did what I wanted. I read for hours. I walked without a destination. I took an online course in watercolor and spilled blue paint all over my table and laughed instead of crying. And one afternoon, I wrote something I'd never written before, a story just for me. Not for
I
David.
gave him everything,
Not for
my
approval.
love, my
Not even to
savings, my
prove I'd
trust.
survived. It was
All he
about a
wanted was
grandmother
my
who starts
money,
a
not my
pirate radio
presents.
station from her garage and secretly counsels broken families under the name Captain Grace. It was silly, full of big heart and even bigger hijinks, but for the first time in years, I felt alive on the page. I emailed it to my creative writing professor, expecting nothing. He emailed me back the same night. Lorraine, this is wonderful, heartbreaking, and funny. You
I
have a
gave him
real voice.
everything, my
Would you
love, my
consider submitting it
savings,
to the
my
student journal?
trust.
I
All
stared at
he
the
wanted
screen,
was my money,
stunned.
not my
Nobody
presents.
had asked to publish anything of mine since 1976, when a poem I wrote in college made it into a local newspaper. It felt like someone had opened a window I'd long forgotten was there. I clicked yes. David continued calling every Sunday. Sometimes he just talked about work. He'd taken a job at a nonprofit, nothing flashy. Said he wanted to build something that mattered. He
I
was
gave him
quiet about money,
everything,
and
my
I didn't
love, my
ask.
savings,
Then
my
one Sunday
trust.
he asked if I'd meet
All
him
he
for
wanted
lunch.
was my money,
Just
not my
us.
presents.
No cameras. No big moment. Just mother and son. I hesitated, but I said yes. We met at a small cafe, the kind with handwritten chalk menus and iced tea in mason jars. He stood when I arrived. Opened the door. Pulled out my chair. Good start, I teased. He smiled sheepishly. I'm learning.
I
I
gave
didn't
him
recognize the
everything,
woman
my
who
love,
walked in
my
next.
savings, my
She wasn't
trust.
wearing bitterness.
All he wanted
She
was my
wasn't
money,
clutching
not my
guilt.
presents.
She wasn't bracing for insult or rejection. She was me. And David, he noticed. You look good, Mom. Thank you, I said. I feel good. He swallowed hard, like it hurt to say what came next. I wish I had seen this sooner. I do too, I said. But we're here now. We talked for over an hour. He didn't bring up Brittany.
I gave him
I didn't
everything,
ask.
my love,
Some
my
wounds
savings,
aren't meant
my
to be
trust.
reopened. Not when the
All he
scar
wanted was
finally
my
stopped
money,
itching.
not my presents.
At the end, he handed me a card. Inside was a check for $500. A start, he said. I'll take it, I replied. Back at the community center, things had picked up. Word of my talk had spread. The coordinator asked if I'd consider doing a monthly series. Not just on family betrayal, but on recovery, resilience, and reinvention. They called it the second act
I
sessions.
gave him everything, my
I stood at
love,
the
my
front of that same
savings, my
room,
trust.
twice a month now,
All he wanted
speaking
was
not as
my
a victim,
money, not my
but as a woman
presents.
who had turned pain into purpose. And each time more people came. One woman brought her estranged daughter. They cried together at the end. A man brought divorce papers he was finally ready to sign after 15 years of loneliness. A widow in her 80s said she was going back to school to study anthropology. Something was happening. Not just to me. To all of us.
I
The
gave him
forgotten were
everything,
finding
my
their voices
love,
again.
my savings,
And I was
my
honored to
trust.
be part of that chorus.
All he wanted was
Then
my
came
money,
the letter
not my presents.
from the university. My pirate grandmother story had been selected for publication. I was being featured in the fall edition of the student journal, Nevada Writes. I held the acceptance letter in my hand and stared at it for a long time. Then I walked over to my bookshelf. Dug out the folder. I kept all of David's old art from elementary school. Inside was a finger painting of us together under a tree.
I gave him
Me and
everything,
Mommy in
my
green
love,
crayon.
my savings,
I
my
smiled
trust.
and placed
All
the
he wanted
acceptance
was
letter
my
next to
money,
it.
not my
Full
presents.
circle. The week the journal was released, David called again. But this time, he wasn't alone. Hey, Mom, he said. There's someone here who wants to say hello. A child's voice came through the phone. Hi. I froze. David chuckled. Don't worry, it's not mine. I'm helping out with the kids' literacy program at the shelter. We're reading stories this week, and
gave
I
him
told them my
everything,
mom was
my
a writer.
love, my savings,
My throat
trust.
closed up.
All he
She read
wanted
them your
was my
pirate
money,
grandma
not my
story, he said.
presents.
They loved it. I couldn't speak, but I didn't have to, because in that moment I understood. I had become the woman I used to dream about being. Not rich, not revered, but real, rooted, and finally seen. Later that night, I opened my laptop, started a new file, titled it, Letters to the Woman I Almost Forgot I
I gave him
Was.
everything, my love,
I didn't
my
know where it would
savings,
go
my
yet,
trust.
but I knew it was time
All
to
he
write the
wanted
full
was
story,
my money, not
not
my
just for me,
presents.
but for every mother who gave too much, every grandmother who went invisible, every woman who thought her best years were behind her until she dared to demand better. And just as I hit save, a message popped up. From Ruth, the woman who had once cried after my meeting.
Lorraine.
You told me I wasn't done. So I called my son. We're meeting for the first
I
time
gave
in
him
6
everything,
years.
my love,
Thank
my
you.
savings, my
R.
trust.
I smiled.
All
The
he
second
wanted was
act
my
wasn't just
money,
mine.
not my presence.
It belonged to all of us. And the next chapter? Well, it was going to be written in bold. The university held a small launch event for the fall issue of Nevada Rights. It wasn't glamorous, just an open reading space at the student library, some folding chairs, sparkling cider, and a modest podium. But to me, it felt like the Pulitzer. When I arrived, my name was
I
printed
gave
on a
him
folded
everything,
place
my
card.
love, my
Lorraine
savings, my
Harrison,
trust.
guest author.
All he
I
wanted
stared
was
at it
my
for a
money,
moment too
not my
long.
presence.
Because even at 69 years old, that feeling that someone finally saw you, named you, invited you, was still electric. I wore the navy dress again. The one I hadn't touched since the day of David's wedding rejection. This time, I wore it not for someone else's approval, but to honor the woman who had stood tall through shame, silence, and recovery. When I stepped up to read my story, I didn't
I
shake.
gave him
I
everything,
stood
my
straight,
love, my
smiled at the
savings, my
audience, and
trust.
began. The
All he
first thing
wanted was
Captain
my
Grace
money,
ever
not
did
my
was steal a
presence.
microphone. Not because she wanted to speak, but because she was tired of being the only one listening. And just like that, the room leaned in. After the reading, a young woman approached me. She was in her early 20s, maybe a grad student, with short curly hair and a backpack slung off one shoulder. "Hi, Miss Harrison," she said. "My name's Elise. I'm an editor for
I
the
gave him
student journal."
everything, my love,
"Hello,
my
Elise.
savings, my
Thank you for
trust.
publishing my piece."
All he wanted
She
was my money,
smiled.
not my
"Actually, thank
presence.
you. We almost didn't have a senior story this issue. But when yours came in, it changed everything. The way you wrote about invisibility and power, it was raw, honest. People needed to read it." I blinked. People. "It's our most read piece this semester," she said.
We got letters about it.
One from a professor, another from a reader in Arizona who saw it online and said it
I
helped her
gave him
reconnect with her
everything, my
estranged
love,
mother.
my savings,
I
my
felt something
trust.
expand in my
All he
chest.
wanted was
All
my
those
money,
years
not my
spent feeling like I
presence.
didn't matter, like my only purpose was to enable someone else's dream. And now here I was, making a mark, one sentence at a time. That night, after the event, I came home to a voicemail from David. "Mom," he said, "I saw the university post about your reading.
Wow.
You looked incredible. And the story, God, I didn't even know you
I
had that
gave
in
him
you."
everything, my
There was a
love, my
pause.
savings, my
"Would you come
trust.
speak at my work next week?
All he wanted
They're
was
doing
my
this
money,
series on
not my
healing through
presence.
storytelling. I told them about your talk at the community center. They want you." I stared at the phone.
Speak?
Publicly? At his office? The same son who once told me I'd ruin the aesthetic of his wedding? I laughed out loud. But not because it was funny. Because it was surreal. The woman he once disinvited was now the voice he was offering as an example of healing.
I gave him
I called him
everything, my
back.
love, my
Sure,
savings, my
I
trust.
said.
"I'll
All
come,
he wanted
but
was my
I don't need a
money, not
ride.
my presence.
I'll drive myself." The office was in a brick building near downtown. Nothing fancy. Nonprofit energy, mismatched chairs, mismatched humans, all of them kind, curious, tired in a real-world kind of way. David introduced me. "This is Lorraine," he said to the small crowd. "She's not just my mom. She's the reason I started rethinking what family means."
I gave him everything,
I
my
nodded
love,
once,
my
then
savings,
stepped up
my
to the
trust.
podium. And
All he
I told
wanted
them the
was
short
my
version.
money, not my
How a mother
presence.
can be erased from a celebration she paid for. How silence doesn't mean weakness. How healing is not about revenge. It's about remembering your worth. There were tears in the room.
Nods.
Someone clapped halfway through and started a chain reaction. Afterward, a woman approached me. "Your story," she said, "it's not just about parenting. It's about what we accept.
I
And
gave him
how we stop
everything, my
accepting
love,
it."
my savings,
I didn't
my
need
trust.
anything more.
All
But
he
then
wanted
David
was
stood
my
beside
money,
me,
not my
placed a
presence.
hand gently on my shoulder, and whispered, "You're everything I want to become now." That almost broke me. But I didn't cry. Because strength, once rediscovered, is hard to shake. 2 days later, I was back at Silver Threads, sharing the experience with the group. They hooted and hollered when I told them about the reading, the invitations, the ripple effect. Denise raised a
I
mug
gave him
and
everything,
toasted.
my love,
"To
my
Lorraine,
savings,
may your
my
voice stay
trust.
loud, your
All he
boundaries
wanted
stay
was my
firm,
money,
and your
not my
stories
presence."
never get stolen again." Cheers, I said, raising mine back. And may every woman here get her own podium someday. Joe leaned forward. So, when's the book coming? I laughed. A book. You've got stories, Lorraine. And you're not just telling them, you're changing people with them. The room nodded. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I opened a fresh document on my laptop.
My savings, my
Title,
trust.
The Woman Who
All
Was
he
Uninvited.
wanted was my money,
Subtitle,
not my presence.
and came anyway, just not how they expected. But just when I thought the journey had reached its final chapter, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside was a photo. David as a toddler, covered in spaghetti, laughing, eyes squinted. In my lap, I was smiling, truly smiling, hair wild, joy radiant. On the back of the photo, for the woman who never stopped showing up,
love, my savings,
even when she was
my
told
trust.
not to. Underneath
All he
it
wanted
was a
was
folded
my money,
piece of
not my
stationery.
presence.
From Brittany. Lorraine, I don't expect forgiveness. I do owe you acknowledgement. You gave more than we deserved. And when you spoke your truth, I saw something I never expected. My own mother asked me why I couldn't be more like you. You didn't ruin our wedding. You revealed it. Thank you, Brittany. I set the letter down and let myself feel nothing.
I gave him
Not
everything,
joy,
my love,
not
my
satisfaction,
savings, my trust.
Just peace.
All
Because
he wanted was
sometimes
my money,
quiet
not my
justice
presence.
doesn't scream. It whispers. And the echo reaches farther than you think. The photo from Brittany sat on my mantle for 3 days before I decided what to do with it. I wasn't sentimental about her. Not in the traditional sense. But the gesture wasn't meaningless. In fact, it was probably the most honest thing she'd ever done. Not for me. For herself. She had finally admitted what everyone at that wedding already knew.
My trust.
The mother of the groom hadn't
All he
ruined
wanted
anything.
was my money,
She
not my
had revealed the
presence.
truth. And that truth had rippled through every fake smile, every filtered post, every self-serving toast. I didn't need revenge anymore. Because I had something so much better. A legacy. I published my book 6 months later. The Woman Who Was Uninvited debuted through a small independent press that specialized in older voices. My editor, a woman in her 70s, called it the sharpest knife in a velvet drawer. The book wasn't angry. It was honest. A collection of essays, fictionalized stories, and quiet moments all built around one theme. What happens when women stop begging to be included and start living like they matter? My launch event wasn't at a fancy rooftop. It was at the community center, where I'd started. 50 folding chairs. A table with lemonade and oatmeal cookies. Pete stood in the back with his arms folded and a proud smirk. David sat in the front row, this time with no expectations,
Just awe.
When I finished reading the final passage about my grandmother's earrings, and the day I realized I didn't need to wear them to remember her, there was a moment of complete stillness. Then applause.
Loud. Real.
From every corner of the room. Someone shouted, "We love you, Lorraine." And for the first time, I believed it. Not because I needed their approval, but because I loved me, too. 2 weeks later, I got a call from a national women's podcast, then an email from a book club in New York City, then a message from a mother in New Zealand who had read my book and said, "I never realized how much of myself I had given away until your words gave me permission to take some of it back." I sat on my porch that night with a blanket over my knees, watching the stars over Nevada. The desert air was cool. The kind of cool that reminds you you're still alive, still becoming, still needed. On my 70th birthday, the community center threw me a surprise party. They decorated with lavender and photos from my life that Pete had secretly collected and digitized. There was even a cake with the cover of my book printed in icing. David was there, of course. This time, he didn't ask to speak. He just stood next to me with a gift in his hands. Inside the box was my original check. The $38,000. He had saved it. Every penny. Paid it back in full.
I gave him everything.
And underneath
love,
it was a handwritten note.
My trust.
This was never just
All
money.
He wanted was my
this was
money,
love I
not
didn't know
my
how to
presence.
carry. I think I can carry it now. Your son. I didn't cry, but I held the check to my heart and whispered, "Thank you." Not because I needed it, but because I needed him to know he'd finally seen me. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and the lights twinkled across the community lawn, A little girl tugged at my skirt. "Are you the pirate grandma lady?" she asked.
I gave him
I
everything,
laughed.
my love,
"I
my
suppose I
savings,
am.
my trust.
Can you tell me a
All
story?"
he
I
wanted
knelt
was my
down.
money,
Of
not my
course,
presents.
I said.
"But only if you promise to tell one of your own someday." She nodded furiously. And just like that, a new voice was born. "My name is Lorraine Harrison. I am 70 years old. I am a mother, a widow, a writer, a woman who once thought her best years were over. But I was wrong, because justice isn't always loud. Sometimes
I
it's a
gave him
soft voice
everything, my
behind a
love, my
microphone, a
savings, my
letter written in the
trust.
dark, a
All he
boundary
wanted
drawn
was my
in
money,
love
not my
instead of anger.
presents.
Sometimes justice is just finally being heard. And if you've ever felt silenced, if you've ever been excluded, erased, or made to feel small in a story you helped build, let me be the one to say it. You're not too old. You are not too late. And you are absolutely not done.
There's still time to speak.
Still time to begin again. So write your
I
story.
gave him
Tell the
everything,
truth.
my love,
And
my
when the world
savings,
doesn't
my
invite you,
trust.
make your
All
own
he wanted was
entrance.
my money,
Because
not
someone
my
out there is
presents.
waiting to hear your voice, and they won't believe how strong it is until you finally use it. If you felt seen by this story, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment. Your voice matters too.